Okay, so let's jump right into this Ontario election thing.
Sounds good.
You've sent us a whole bunch of articles and some online discussions, and it seems like you're really trying to get a handle on what's up with this early election call.
Yeah, in February, no less.
Right. Like, it's not exactly balmy Ontario weather out there right now for campaigning.
Five lot.
So we've got all these polls and analyses and even some pretty strongly worded opinions from social media. It really seems like Premier Ford is, well, rolling the dice with this one.
Yeah, it is pretty unusual to see a premier call an early election when they already have, a majority government.
Hmm.
It does kind of suggest that this is a very calculated move by Doug Ford and his progressive conservatives.
Yeah, right away we see this poll from Abacus Data, and it shows Ford with a pretty big lead. They're even saying he's, quote, well positioned to be reelected. But it's politics, right? So like any good political thriller, there are always a couple twists that could, completely change the game.
For sure. And the poll itself actually highlights two key factors that could threaten Ford's lead. So first, it's all the voters who want change were to rally behind just one opposition party. Well, that could really shift things.
Yeah.
But right now, that desire for change is split between the NDP and the Liberals, and that dilutes their impact quite a bit.
Yeah, it's like when your car's stuck in the mud and everyone's pushing in different directions.
Exactly. Like a unified push would be way more effective.
Definitely.
The second factor the poll mentions is the, quote, intensity of that desire for change. So if more voters get really, truly dissatisfied with the current government, well, that could really energize the opposition and, potentially even sway the election.
And speaking of dissatisfaction, there's a lot of talk online about those $200 carbon tax relief checks, the ones that just happened to land in mailboxes right before the election was announced.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Some people are saying it's a blatant attempt to buy votes,
Hmm.
while others see it as a legitimate way to give money back to taxpayers.
Yeah, it definitely raises some questions about the timing and motivations behind this whole early election thing. I mean,
Right.
some people are even questioning whether it's legal. They see it as pre-election campaigning that's just disguised as government policy.
Interesting. So let's shift gears a bit and look at how people are feeling about Ford's performance so far. It's a real mixed bag out there,
Yeah.
with some pretty strong opinions on both sides.
Yeah, definitely. From the sources you sent, it seems some people feel he's actually doing a pretty good job. They point to his stance against those Trump trade tariffs a while back. They say he stood up for Ontario's interests.
Makes sense.
Others are praising his focus on the economy and his business-friendly policies.
Yeah, that's definitely a theme we see a lot. But there's also a whole lot of criticism out there, especially around those cuts to healthcare and education. Oh, and we can't forget about the Greenbelt controversy either. That one really raised some eyebrows about his environmental policies.
Yeah, for sure. Those concerns are definitely showing up in the stuff we're looking at. Critics are pointing to, declining health and education outcomes as a direct result of those cuts. Plus, they're worried about the impact all that development will have on Ontario's environment.
And the opposition parties, the Liberals and the NDP, they seem to be facing some serious uphill
That's tough.
battles.
Yeah, it's not looking easy for them.
One article even called the Liberals' problem a brand problem.
Wow.
And then you've got the NDP, who some say have a really strong leader.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
But even they seem to be having trouble getting their message out there.
Well, the media plays a huge role in shaping how the public sees things. And it's really hard for smaller parties to break through all that noise and get people's attention.
Yeah, it's like trying to have a conversation in a room where everyone's shouting at the top of their lungs.
Pretty much.
And speaking of crowded rooms, we can't forget about good old voter apathy.
Oh, yeah.
Ontario has this bit of a reputation for low voter turnout, and some are worried we'll see that happen again this time around.
It's definitely possible.
Plus, there's this other interesting pattern we see in Ontario politics. It seems like voters often elect a provincial government that's the opposite of whatever federal party's in power.
Huh, like a pendulum swinging back and forth.
Exactly.
Interesting. Well, that low voter turnout thing,
Yeah.
that can really have a big impact on election outcomes. It could potentially give a huge advantage to a particular party or ideology.
For sure. Now, you sent over this book called Against the People. It's from CUPE Ontario,
Right.
which is the Canadian Union of Public Employees.
I know them. They're a big union representing a lot of public sector workers.
Right. And let me tell you, this book does not paint a pretty picture of Ford's impact on public services.
I can imagine.
They're basically arguing that health and education outcomes are going downhill fast,
Mm.
that the housing crisis is getting worse, and that the cost of living is just squeezing everyday Ontarians.
I'm not surprised to hear that. What I find striking about their book, though, is how much detail they go into, and they use all these hard-hitting statistics. Like, they highlight how housing costs have gone up by 23% and how food prices have jumped up a crazy 24%. And get this, in Toronto, 1 in 10 people rely on food banks.
Wow.
Those numbers really paint a grim picture of what people are dealing with in Ontario right now.
It's not just the numbers themselves, though, right? The book tries to put a human face on all those statistics.
Yeah, they tell stories of real people.
Like, they talk about the impact of those insane wait times at the landlord and tenant board.
Oh, yeah, those are ridiculous.
The average wait time has ballooned to 277 days.
Seriously,
Compared to just 40 days back in 2018.
that's a huge difference. I mean, imagine waiting almost a year to resolve a dispute with your landlord.
That's crazy.
It's incredibly stressful and disruptive.
Totally. So now let's talk about this big idea the NDP has put forward. It's this proposal to buy back Highway 407 and get rid of all the tolls.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
It sparked a lot of debate online.
Well, it touches on so many things we've been talking about.
Mhm.
Infrastructure, affordability,
Yeah.
even the whole question of what the government's role should be. It makes you think about whether essential things like highways should be owned by the public or by private companies.
Right. Some people are arguing that buying back the 407 would actually help reduce traffic on all the other highways,
Yeah.
which would make it easier for everyone to get around.
Makes sense.
But then others are worried about how much it would cost to buy back something like that.
Yeah, that's not a small purchase.
And they're also wondering if getting rid of the tolls would just encourage more people to use the 407.
Which could just shift the congestion to a different spot.
Exactly. It's a really tricky situation with no easy answers.
No easy answers at all.
And it speaks to this bigger debate about how we should manage infrastructure in a province that's, constantly growing.
For sure.
Okay, so speaking of complex issues, we also got this analysis from the CBC about Doug Ford's, quote, get it done track record.
Oh, yeah. What did they find?
Well, they've actually been tracking his progress on all those campaign promises he made back in 2022. And it seems like, at least on paper, he's either kept most of them or is in progress on them. But we all know the devil's in the details, right?
Absolutely. Initiatives like that are so important. They hold politicians accountable and give voters a clear idea of how well their elected officials are actually doing. Because it's one thing to make promises, but it's another thing entirely to actually keep them.
Totally. So let's take infrastructure, for example. The CBC analysis highlights all this progress he's supposedly made on Highway 413 and the Bradford Bypass. Those two big projects he's always talking about.
Right. Those are huge infrastructure projects. They have all kinds of environmental and economic impacts. But the CBC analysis also points out that neither one has actually broken ground yet.
Really?
So maybe there's some progress going on behind the scenes. But they're still a long way from becoming a reality.
Makes you wonder what in progress really means.
Right.
And, all that lack of visible progress has really fueled criticism from the opposition parties. They're arguing that Ford is more interested in big, flashy projects than actually dealing with the stuff Ontarians need right now.
I've heard that too.
They point to things like the school repair backlogs and that whole hallway medicine crisis in hospitals as proof that he's neglecting these essential services.
Yeah, hallway medicine, it's a powerful image. It refers to that practice of treating patients in hallways and other spaces that aren't meant for that.
Right.
Because the hospitals are so overcrowded and there aren't enough beds.
Yeah, it's pretty awful.
It's become the symbol of how much pressure Ontario's healthcare system is under.
It's definitely something voters are thinking about.
For sure.
Okay, so now the CBC analysis also talks about Ford's promise to hire more doctors, nurses, and personal support workers, which sounds great on the surface.
Sounds like what we need.
But they're saying the way he worded that promise was so vague that it's basically impossible to know if he's actually kept it or not.
Huh. That's interesting. It makes you think about how carefully politicians choose their words when they make promises.
Yeah, for sure.
Because vague promises like that can be twisted to make it look like they've accomplished something, even if the real problems haven't been addressed.
So it's not just about whether they did what they said they'd do, but also about how well they did it and whether it actually made any real difference in people's lives.
Exactly. And, even with those efforts to hire more healthcare staff, We're still seeing huge problems in the system. People are still waiting forever to see a family doctor, and the emergency rooms are packed. It shows just how much more work needs to be done to fix these issues.
It feels like every time they try to fix one thing, another thing breaks.
It could definitely feel that way.
Now, the CBC analysis also looked at affordability, which is obviously a big concern for a lot of Ontarians.
It's a top issue for sure.
And they noticed that most of what Ford has done in that area has been about helping drivers.
Really?
Like, he got rid of those vehicle registration fees.
Right.
And he cut the gas tax.
Okay.
And he even removed tolls on some highways. All that might give some drivers a bit of a break.
I guess so.
But it doesn't address the bigger affordability problems a lot of people are dealing with.
Especially when it comes to housing.
Yeah, the housing crisis is huge.
It impacts everything. People's ability to afford food, transportation, childcare, you name it.
It's like they're putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Ouch.
You know, it might make you feel a little better for a minute.
Yeah, temporarily.
But the real problem is still there.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So speaking of Band-Aid solutions, can we talk about that Greenbelt controversy for a second? It really put Ford's environmental record in the spotlight.
Yeah, it did.
Do you remember that promise he made back in 2018 to not touch the Greenbelt?
Vaguely.
It seemed so clear-cut back then.
You'd think so.
But things are never that simple in politics, are they?
Never.
So he ends up deciding to open up the Greenbelt for development.
Remind me what the Greenbelt is again.
It's that protected area of green space that surrounds the greater Toronto area.
Oh, right.
And his decision to open it up just sparked this massive backlash.
Wow.
People were furious. Critics were saying it would lead to urban sprawl
Ugh, I hate sprawl.
and destroy valuable farmland and natural habitats.
Makes sense.
And of course, it would undermine all those efforts to fight climate change.
Yeah, that's not good.
It wasn't just environmental groups who were upset either. The Auditor General actually launched an investigation.
Really?
And later on, she revealed that opening up the Greenbelt meant that a bunch of developers got an $8.3 billion increase in land value.
$8.3 billion.
It looked like Ford was playing favorites.
Yeah, that's not a good look.
It made people think he was putting the interests of a few ahead of what was good for everyone.
Definitely not a good look.
And that perception of favoritism really hurt Ford's credibility, even with people who might have agreed with him on other things.
I could see that.
It highlighted this tension in Ontario politics
Between what and what?
between protecting the environment and all the pressure to develop more land and the influence of all these powerful interest groups.
It's a tough balance.
So eventually the backlash got so intense that Ford had to back down.
He did.
He gave up on his plans to develop the Greenbelt,
Wow.
but the damage was already done.
Yeah, once that trust is broken.
It made people question his judgment,
Definitely.
his commitment to protecting the environment,
For sure.
and whether he was even willing to listen to what people were saying.
It was a defining moment for him.
Absolutely.
It's going to have a lasting impact on how voters see him and his party.
So we've got all these factors swirling around in the selection.
It's a lot.
On the one hand, you've got Ford with a lead in the polls, right?
But on the other hand, you've got all this skepticism and mistrust because of some of the things he's done.
And then you've got the opposition parties trying to take advantage of all that discontent and present themselves as a better alternative.
It's shaping up to be a pretty fascinating race.
Definitely. As we move forward, though, it's important to remember that elections are about more than just the politicians or the parties. They're about the future, about what kind of communities we want to live in, what kind of society we want to build.
That's a good point. So let's keep digging into these issues and see what else we can learn from all this stuff you sent over. It's time to go even deeper into this Ontario election.
I'm ready when you are, so welcome back. We covered a ton of ground in the last part. But let's maybe shift gears a bit and think about some of the bigger picture stuff.
Okay, sounds good.
And some of the, potential consequences of the choices that Ontario voters are facing. Going through all these online discussions, one thing that really jumped out at me was this undercurrent of frustration with how political parties, especially the ones in power, seem to use public money for their own benefit.
Yeah, that's a really insightful observation. It speaks to this fundamental tension that exists in democracies. Balancing the need for governments to communicate with the public, on the one hand, but also guarding against those communications being used for, partisan advantage.
It's like this tightrope walk between keeping the public informed and trying to manipulate their opinions.
Exactly.
And when people start to feel like they're being played, It can really breed this cynicism and distrust in the whole system.
Exactly. That cynicism can have a ripple effect. It can lead to voter apathy, lower turnout, and ultimately it weakens democratic institutions.
That's a scary thought.
It's a dangerous cycle for sure, one we need to be mindful of.
So we've got this backdrop of frustration and skepticism. How does that play into the specific challenges facing Ontario, like healthcare education, the environment?
Well, let's start with healthcare. We already talked about those long wait times, the staffing shortages, the strain on hospitals. But some of these sources go deeper.
Okay.
They express these broader anxieties about the overall direction of healthcare in Ontario.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk online about privatization
Right.
and whether Ford's government is truly committed to a publicly funded system.
Big question.
People are really worried about the possibility of two-tier healthcare.
Where those who can afford it get faster and better treatment.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern. But it's not just about privatization either.
What else is there?
It's about funding priorities, too. The CUPE book actually highlights how Ontario spends less per person on healthcare than other provinces.
Interesting.
And they make this really compelling argument. They say that if Ontario's spending was on par with other provinces, we'd have like 35,000 more healthcare workers and almost 2,000 more hospital beds.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is. It makes you wonder if the government is really investing enough in public health care
Right.
and whether those funding choices are hurting the quality and accessibility of care.
It's like trying to run a marathon in worn-out shoes with no water.
Ouch.
You might be able to start the race,
Yeah.
but you're definitely not going to finish strong.
And just like a runner needs the right support to succeed, a strong healthcare system needs enough funding staff and resources to take care of everyone.
Makes sense. It's not just about healthcare, though, right?
Not at all.
Education seems to be facing a lot of the same problems.
True.
Parents are worried about budget cuts, larger class sizes, and not enough support for students who need extra help.
Well, people see education as the foundation for a successful society.
For sure.
But when we don't put enough money into it,
Mhm.
the consequences can be really far-reaching.
Yeah, we risk creating a system where opportunities are limited and inequality just keeps growing.
Exactly. So it's like we're planting seeds in bad soil and expecting them to bloom.
We need to nurture our education system if we want it to thrive and give our kids the best chance to succeed.
That's a powerful way to put it. It speaks to how vital education is.
Okay, so healthcare and education are in a tough spot. What about the environment? How does that fit into all of this?
Well, the environment is always a hot topic in Ontario politics.
Yeah.
The Greenbelt controversy, the worries about urban sprawl, the challenge of climate change. There's a lot to unpack.
There is.
What's interesting is that environmental issues are often presented as being at odds with economic growth.
Right.
But some of these sources are saying that there's a strong economic argument for protecting the environment and investing in sustainability.
It's like that saying, there's no economy on a dead planet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to get past this short-sighted view that protecting the environment will hold us back economically.
Right.
We need to recognize that a healthy environment is key for long-term prosperity.
It's about finding that balance where economic growth and taking care of the environment go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Instead of
Yeah.
always being pitted against each other.
So basically, we've got all these massive, complicated challenges facing Ontario. A healthcare system struggling to keep up, an education system that needs help, and an environment under constant pressure. It can feel really overwhelming trying to figure it all out and decide who to vote for.
It's totally understandable to feel that way, especially in this crazy political climate where information is often presented in a way that's meant to trigger an emotional response.
Yeah, instead of encouraging people to think critically.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
can feel like everyone's just yelling at you from their own little soapbox, making it impossible to hear anything clearly.
And at the end of the day, it's our votes that matter.
It's your chance to shape the future of your community and your province.
So to make our voices heard, we have to do our research, think for ourselves, and get involved.
It's not always easy, but it's crucial for a healthy democracy.
So don't just take what politicians say at face value. Dig deeper. Look at the evidence. Think about the long-term effects and make your decision based on a real understanding of the issues.
I like that. And don't be afraid to question everything. Just because something has always been done a certain way doesn't mean it's the right way. We need to be open to new ideas and new perspectives if we're going to tackle these challenges.
I think that's a great takeaway from all of this. We've explored a lot of different viewpoints and uncovered some really interesting stuff. But ultimately, it's up to each voter to weigh the evidence, consider the options and decide what they think is the best path forward for Ontario.
Absolutely.
You've given us a lot to think about. But before we wrap up, there's one more thing I'm really curious to explore. It's something that's been kind of swirling around in my mind as we've been talking about all this. It's this whole question of leadership. Like, what does that even mean these days? We've got Doug Ford with his get it done thing,
Right.
but we've also talked about how a lot of people don't really trust him.
Yeah, that's a problem.
And then you've got the other parties trying to stand out with their own leadership styles. It makes me wonder what qualities voters are actually looking for.
It seems like you're trying to figure out how these sources are portraying not just the specific policies,
Yeah.
but the very nature of leadership itself.
Exactly. It's like beyond the platforms and all those promises. What kind of person do we actually want in charge? Someone who just charges ahead. Someone who tries to get everyone on board. Or maybe something completely different.
Well, we see a few different approaches in the material you've shared.
Okay, like what?
Ford definitely projects this image of strength and decisiveness.
Yeah, he's all about action.
Exactly. He's less about careful consideration and more about just getting things done.
But like we said, that can make people think he's not being transparent.
Right, and they worry about what the long-term consequences might be.
It's like this classic leadership dilemma. The leader who rushes into things might make mistakes, but the one who takes forever to make a decision might miss out on opportunities.
You've got to find that sweet spot.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there's some kind of middle ground.
Maybe the best leaders are the ones who can adapt depending on the situation.
Okay, so be flexible.
Right? They can be decisive when they need to be, but also take the time to think things through. And they can be strong and bold, but also know how to work with others.
So it's about finding the right balance for each situation.
Exactly.
And it's not just Ford, right? All the leaders are trying to connect with voters on a deeper level,
Definitely.
trying to tap into their hopes and fears.
They're all painting pictures of a better future, but they're each using their own style.
It's like they're all using different colors and brushstrokes.
That's a great way to put it. We see this in how they talk about the economy, affordability, healthcare, all the things that really matter to people.
They're all offering their own vision.
But it's up to the voters to decide which vision resonates with them the most.
And I think even more important than that is whether a leader seems to really get the problems people are facing.
Right. It's one thing to promise things.
It's another thing to actually understand what people are going through.
That's so true. Throughout all these sources, we see this theme of disconnect between the people in power and the everyday lives of Ontarians.
Like the leaders are living in a different world.
It's like they don't fully grasp the struggles of the people they're supposed to represent.
We see it in those stories of families struggling to pay their bills,
Right.
people waiting forever for medical treatment.
And communities feeling like their concerns about the environment are being ignored.
It makes you think, maybe real leadership isn't just about setting a direction,
Maybe it's also about really listening to the people you're leading.
understanding their needs and hopes.
Maybe the best leaders are the ones who can not only imagine a better future, but also make sure everyone is included in that future.
So as we wrap up this whole deep dive into the Ontario election, what's the main thing you want our listener to take away from all of this? What should they be thinking about when they go to vote?
I think the most important thing to remember is that this election isn't just about Doug Ford or any of the other party leaders. It's about the future of Ontario, what kind of province we want to build together. It's about healthcare, education, the environment, affordability, all the things that make our lives and communities better.
It's about making choices that are informed, holding our leaders accountable, and actively shaping the kind of future we want.
Yes, it's about recognizing that our votes have power,
Yeah.
and we shouldn't take that lightly.
So stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, make your voice heard on February 27th.
Your vote matters. It's a crucial part of building a better Ontario for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Ontario election. We'll be back soon with another exploration of the issues that matter most to you.